So onto the main topic for this session. This is making hybrid work for you. Obviously, hybrid working has been around for many years. Even prior to the pandemic, there were a lot of organisations that had started to do this or been forced into doing this because of the way their user base was split out. But it's really come into the fore, obviously, since the pandemic for all of us. I think the term really, I would focus on it in two different ways. We've got staff who work in and out of the office would be hybrid individuals, but we've also got a hybrid workforce where you may have all or part of all of your staff working in the office and part of your staff working remotely. So we kind of want to focus on this on two different levels. How do we keep the user engaged and informed and feel part of the organisation and safe and secure, and obviously all the other IT things we need to think about. And as an organisation, how do we make sure we're keeping up with the requirements? Obviously some of the cybersecurity stuff that the guys are talking about today on the other webinars, just making sure that we're engaging as much as possible and keeping that communication and obviously everything open as we can. So I'm going to jump straight into the first question. And I've kind of ordered these hopefully in a way that it makes it kind of a nicely streamlined, but this a very broad question from Kay, which is really good because it's going to open up a lot of communication here, which is around what are the pros and cons of hybrid working? I think we need to look at both angles. So there's both pros and cons for the organisation, but also both pros and cons for the individual staff members as well. So I'm going to kick off with a few pros, I think, of hybrid working. By all means, as I say, chuck something in the chat or raise your hand and I would encourage you to help me on this. First one that I've noted, especially for us here at Click, is around flexibility. So staff can choose where and potentially even when they work. We've got clients that have members of staff working all over the world, different time zones, or logging on at different times, which has worked really well. And I think we're seeing generally in hybrid working, we're seeing an increase in productivity as well. So employees find they're more productive or can be more productive when working from home, working remotely. You get less office distractions and obviously the ability to create your own kind of nice work environment in a space that you like working in. Don't have to go too far for it. The third one I've got here is recruitment. I think this is a really big one, not just for us here at Click, but I think particularly for the third sector. Not only is it the ability to kind of open up a wider net in terms of who you can consider hiring for the organisation and bringing on board, collaborating across different locations, I think it's now a minimum requirement really to be offering some form of hybrid working. There's lots of reports, I think it was Cootsbank a little while ago, were in the news where they were losing staff by the dozens because they enforced a 5-day working week back in the office and all of a sudden got an influx of submitted P45s from their staff. So, and yeah, being able to offer that, I don't even think it's generational. I think previously it would have been generational, so perhaps younger people that might want some of that more flexibility. We're now seeing it across the board. All generations, all ages, all experiences are hoping to have that sort of level of hybrid working and that flexibility in place. And naturally, the charity sector, like all the others, we really want to make sure we're hiring the best people. So being able to offer that flexibility and make that position as attractive as possible to them is just going to reap the benefits for everybody. The final one on the pros from me, cost savings, is the one we always like. There are varying schools of thought around the cost saving side of things. Obviously, we've got some situations where there might be some investment needed to put hybrid working in place in the first place. But hopefully, those investments will pay dividends further down the line. We may have savings on commuting costs, work attire. I can't imagine many organisations on here have uniforms and things like that. But if you do, then obviously there's that side of things. Office overhead. Even since the pandemic, but certainly more recently, we're noticing a lot of our clients that are moving to either smaller offices or getting rid of offices completely. Huge expense saved of having those physical in-person offices, particularly if you don't have, or if those offices don't have in-person requirements. So, people coming in, members, companions, visitors coming into the office, then obviously that's a massive saving. And then the same really, and I do come back to this a little bit later on equipment spend, and obviously encouraging users to bring their own device, and they can now use those in a safe way with a lot of the cloud services that are around. So I'll come back to those because there's some very specific questions on those. But yeah, those are a few of the pros. I think in terms of cons, certainly some of the cons that we've thought about here. They're not necessarily deal breakers on hybrid working, but I think they're just challenges we need to be aware of and overcome in your working practices, really. So first one is obviously communication challenges. We want to make sure that teams can enact and work and interact effectively, and that can be challenging when we've got people working in and out of the office, and especially if you've got people permanently working outside of the office. So I would really encourage you to think about ways of collaborating. A good example actually that we sort of started during COVID and have kept open since is sort of little powwow sessions across the team. It may not be always within the same department, it may be across different departments, or just an open session that anyone can join, catch up. Always good on a Friday morning to keep the momentum going for the week, and just encourage people to join those sessions and just share a bit about what their day's like, what their week's been, what they're up to on the weekend, and just make people, especially remote people, feel a bit more part of the team. On that note, another con, if you like, of hybrid working, or another challenge would be isolation in general. So I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why hybrid working rather than a fully remote working wins as the best solution for me. You can have the flexibility of working from home, but without the isolation that you get from permanently working from home. And I know this because my wife permanently works from home, and I understand how challenging that can be. As I say, it's more about thinking creatively. It's what can you do to encourage, there's going to be some people that can't come back into the organisation or back into the office for whatever reason. So it's how can we think creatively and get them involved and to feel part of the team. And I know a lot of the organisations that I speak to, and there's some of our clients here and people that I've spoken to here, people want to be involved with your organisation because of the great things you do. And sometimes you can lose that sense of inclusivity if you're not in the office or you're not surrounded by your peers. So having some of those creative thinking around how do we make people feel more engaged, how do we keep them informed on what we're doing as an organisation, can be really beneficial. Final one on here, and we've covered this a little bit in some of the other sessions, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on as well, are just security concerns, really. So obviously staff working from multiple locations and potentially between work and personal devices can increase the risk of a cyber incident. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So it is vitally important you think about what technical controls you should have in place, or your IT provider should have in place for you, and the guidance that you give staff as well. I've mentioned a bit later on around policies and practices, making sure that they know what's expected of them, whether they're using your own devices or if they're logging in through their own personal devices as well, and having that in a policy or a handbook or a guide, whatever that looks like, just making sure that they're really up and current on those. That's all for the pros and cons. I'm sure there's lots that we'll come back to as we go along anyway, but that's kind of where we got to with the pros and cons side of things. So the next question, and this kind of nicely dovetails actually into what we've been speaking about already, is asked, how do we convince our board/trustees that staff can work from home? And I've got some thoughts on this, but I would really encourage, if anyone's had this battle with their board, to jump in and give me a heads up, because I would be really grateful to know how that went. Perhaps it's not even with the board, it might be with staff themselves actually, or maybe you've gone the other way and pulled staff back in to the office, how that conversation went as well. But I think first and foremost, helping the board to understand how allowing from working from home can benefit staff and obviously benefit the organisation is the number one thing here. We are often talking about a board who may not be in work at the moment, or maybe working for another organisation that doesn't have this in place. There's no doubt that hybrid working in the way that it is now is very new. So what we tend to find is the boards out there who are familiar with it and understand some of the technology that's around that can make this capable actually are the most willing to accept a working from home practice. So yeah, making sure, I know for us here at Click, hybrid working has enabled us to just expand our workforce without relying on staff being within an hour of our office. We can share desk space. We can encourage communication and collaboration across different members of the team, because you go and sit next to someone who's not really someone that you deal with every day. That really encourages that side of things as well. And as I mentioned before, it's really allowed us to keep up with what is becoming a minimum requirement, certainly for us in the IT industry, of attracting really talented employees and being able to offer flexible or remote working without compromising either us as an organisation, our data security and practices, and obviously the well-being of the member of staff as well. The other thing, and I think this is probably more on the nose for us, is thinking about the technical controls. So often general feedback I'll get, or a common feedback I will get, was the board are unsure around cloud services or unsure about remote working. They're not sure how safe our data will be. So speaking to a Click or your IT partner, whoever that might be, can help alleviate some of those concerns. And they'll be able to look at what your current setup is as an organisation and give some recommendations on technical controls, or, as I mentioned, about those policies and guidelines for your staff as well. Just making sure that people are familiar with what they should be using, and that there's no barrier. We never ever want IT to be a barrier. It should always be a tool for the user and not something that's stopping them working. So just making sure they're really confident on what that's going to look like. Before I do move on, I'm going to double check. Has anyone got any other input they would like to add to this, of any experiences they've had with their board, or either challenges or really good conversation perhaps? I'm going to check in the chat as well. I'm going to try and multitask. No, we're all good. So everyone, nice and smooth, hybrid working, work first time. Excellent. Okay, that's good. The next question we've got from Jen is, how can I make hybrid working most productive for myself and effective for my team, especially during and around team meetings? And this is, again, a very common one, and in all honesty, it's a conversation that we've had internally as well. So I've got a nice few points on this that that I've sort of found and spoken to people about, and also some that we've actually taken on here at Click as well. So number one thing, and in all honesty, this is probably the same for any kind of meeting, just a clear agenda and structure for the meeting. So allow each topic the time and space you need to be able to discuss it fully. That really does go a long way. And also being mindful, sometimes you might be in a situation where you'll have, let's say, 5 people in a physical meeting room in person and 1 or 2 people joining from home. Just making sure you're encouraging and opening the space for them to talk, because that's not always necessarily easy when you're not in the physical space with people. So number one, clear agendas, allow a structure, communication between all the users. I think number 2 is, might sound a little bit draconian, but setting some guidelines around being part of the meeting. So it might be minimizing your teams, closing your Outlook, put yourself on Do Not Disturb, really encouraging remote workers to be engaged in the meeting as though they were sat there and they couldn't have their device in front of them. I think it's quite easy to just drift off and get distracted by it, or just seeing that email, or just seeing something pressing that needs to come in, or someone's just texted me on my phone, I need to deal with that. So multiple screens can really be a distraction. So having good discipline and encouraging and teaching good discipline to stop that happening, I think can be really useful. And then second to last, sorry, I thought it was the final one. Rotation of meeting schedules. So this is one that we've tried to do here. There's, and I'm sure everyone here has had this before, recurring meetings. You can fill up your diary and they recur same time every week, and especially with things like team meetings, you might say every Friday afternoon we catch up. But actually, considering there might be certain days that particular members of staff are always working from home, and I know I prefer to work certain days from home, so rotating when those meetings happen will not only encourage some people to be in the office and out of office and actually get a good experience on both sides of the coin, but also I think you'll get a different freshness. So sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes late afternoon, you'll get a different engagement from different members of the team, where some people, I know I'm a morning person, I always get fired up from 9 a.m. and after lunch probably get a little bit more sluggish. So anytime we have any team meetings in the afternoon, I'm probably far less productive as I could be. So all the morning ones I'm normally really fired up for, but you might find that's the case. So really rotating those meeting schedules, encouraging those remote workers to be part of them in person as well as outside of the office, if they can, if they're hybrid working. Then the final one, and possibly one that we don't do enough, certainly here at Click, but I think maybe all organizations don't, is just encourage really transparent feedback from the users. How are they finding hybrid working at the moment? Are they enjoying it? Are there problems? Sometimes you can get sort of staff satisfaction surveys. I know not a lot of organisations we work with do those, but just finding out what people are recommending and general day-to-day. It could be good or bad, but just really understanding what position they're in and if there's any room for improvement can really go a long way for that as well. The next question we have is from Ravinda, and that is, what is the best way to keep a clear distinction between personal files and apps and corporate files and apps on Bring Your Own Device BYOD, such as a Windows 11 laptop? So this is a really good question, obviously very on the nose technical, so I like these ones. And I think It will depend on what platform you're using, but I know Ravinder works for one of our organizations and is a Microsoft 365 user, so I'm going to sort of hone in on that side of things very quickly. You've got two methods really from Microsoft 365 of accessing your data. You've got logging in through the web browser version. You can go to Office Online and access everything through there, or you can sync them down to your local machine and access your files and folders and OneDrive and SharePoint and all that sort of stuff locally to your machine, and use the local versions of Microsoft Office there. So you've got Outlook and Excel and Word, etc. Many organizations, and we generally encourage this, prefer bring your own device users to only access data through the web browser version of Microsoft 365, if they're using their own device, because then we don't just consider things like firewalls and antivirus for their personal devices, or really too many concerns around if their device gets lost or stolen, because it's a simple password reset. No one can get into their account. There's nothing stored on their local device. It also means that from Ravinder's perspective, you've got a very clear distinction on where your personal files are, they're local to your laptop, and where your work files are, they're all on the web browser version of Office 365, and they're backed up and secure and kept safe in there for you. If you're using the OneDrive sync tool to sync them down to your device, that can be a little bit more difficult to understand the blurred lines, as the OneDrive software you have installed comes within your Windows 11 laptop automatically, will want to map your desktop, your documents folder and your pictures folder all to your Microsoft 365 account. It usually does that automatically, and you'll be able to see this if you go to your desktop. You've got a little green tick next to your icons. That will mean that they're probably syncing up to your OneDrive. So yeah, it's a good chance they'll be syncing down rather than you. So good chance that if you're syncing files down to your own personal device rather than accessing through a web browser and storing them in any of those locations, they are very likely to be syncing to your company account. So just make sure you know the difference. If you're not sure, Ravinder, I know you're a client of ours already, so by all means call into the support team. They'll be able to jump onto your device. We do support personal devices as well. So yeah, if you've got need any help with that, just give us a shout. But if you're not sure, anybody else, just have a quick chat with your IT provider if you've got one, or IT professional. They'll be able to help you understand the differences. But it is a very good point, because we are moving into a situation where the data you store, the lines are being blurred between the two platforms, and we are encouraging people to bring your own device, and same with mobiles and things like that as well. So just having a handle on where that's stored, and understanding that if the organization closes your Office 365 account when you leave, that all of your personal data is not going to disappear with it, is a very important one on there. My final of the pre-submitted questions is, how do we make sure we're employing best practices across the board? And I've kind of looked at this, and the reason I've left this in is I kind of want to encourage anyone that wants to join in on this one. But I think something we haven't really focused on at the moment, and I mentioned it at the start, is user training and policies and guidance. So quite often the expectation would be that, well, they work the same at home as they do in the office, and obviously that's not necessarily the case, not only from the technology, but just from attention span and well-being and health and safety and all that sort of stuff, mental health especially. So I think having really good practices, even some formal training in place around what we expect to happen when you're working from home, can be really helpful to the organization, but also to the individual as well. I think if you're educating users on suspected phishing email. In fact, phishing email is a great example, because you're sat in the office and you go, oh, did you, I'm looking at Oliver because he's over there. Oliver, did you send this email to me? And he says, no. That's very easy for me to understand that he didn't send it. If I'm working from home and I'm quickly doing something, or I'm on another Teams meeting, I've seen this email come through, it can be very difficult to stay focused and understand what key signs to look for. So obviously some of the guys today have talked about some of those technical resources you can have, and tools and software that will be able to do that for you. But I think actually helping users to understand, if you're not sure what you should do, whether that's call Click or your IT professional or your IT support partner, or speak to the member of staff, or having those kind of guidance and controls in place, I think can be really useful.